Hello, everyone. My name is Andi Gray, and welcome to our webinar. We're going to give everybody just a couple more minutes to gather. Thank you to all of you guys who are, all of you people who are here right on time. And one of the things that we are going to do is throw up a poll question so we can get to know our audience. Dahlia, you want to go ahead and put that up? And as soon as you answer it, then it should drop down out of your way. We'd like to know just what your background is, who you are, if you're a business owner, an employee of a privately held business, or an advisor to the same, or some other role. And if you take a minute and fill that out, as I said, we'll give everybody just another minute. It looks like we've still got a lot of people coming in. So we'll let them catch up and then we'll get going here. Okay, as I said a minute ago, my name is Andi Gray. I am president of Strategy Leaders, and we have put a poll question up on the screen for those of you who just joined us, asking you to tell us who you are so we can get to know our audience a little bit. And while people are gathering and filling out that poll question, Dahlia, why don't you go to the next slide and I'll start to tell you a little bit about who we are. As a company, Strategy Leaders was founded based on research that was done at Columbia University, working with an American economist and business historian, Stuart Burchett, who is looking at the question of how to build a 21st century US-centric economy that could compete successfully on a global platform. Try and say that 5 times fast. And I have to say, I am incredibly pleased and rewarded to see the things that have been happening as a result of government intervention coming out of COVID. So much of what Burchett was talking about that we needed to do has been playing out in the COVID and post-COVID economy to the benefit of the privately held marketplace. And it's been a very interesting experiment for me to watch. As a company, Strategy Leaders is over 25 years old. We actually are approaching 30 years. We're a skilled team of individuals, all employees. We're specialists who work on the growth and development of privately held businesses, starting at the owner level and then at the owner's direction, working down through their management teams and employees. We have a huge knowledge base in terms of industries. We've had over 700 clients in our history. We have a nationwide footprint, so we work all over the United States, and we offer a broad set of services, which I'll tell you a little bit more about in just a second. In terms of housekeeping, we do encourage you to let us know if you'd like to have a free consultation. Come and explore the possibilities of whatever it is that you're thinking about doing with your business. We'd love to talk to business owners about where they're going and what they're doing with their businesses. In addition, if you would like a copy of today's webinar, or you would like to get a copy of tools that we have that might be able to help you on your journey, please put your information into the chat window, your email, your phone number, and your name, and Dahlia will reach out and have someone get in touch with you. So now let's take a look at our audience. Dahlia, you want to bring up the poll questions? Well, this is great. It looks like the majority of you, a great vast majority of you, are business owners, some business employees, and then some advisors. So welcome to all of you. And I hope that you find what you're looking for here today. Let's go on to the next slide, and I'm going to talk for just a minute about ways that we help our clients. We've really taken a two directions. One is building this generation of the business, and then I'll get in a second to the next one, which is building the next generation. In terms of building this generation, we really see it as critical to help business owners understand what it means to move from being an entrepreneur to a business builder, deliberately running the business for growth and profit and stability. And we do that by working with the owners, the management teams, building accountability into the organizations, using our extensive knowledge of sales and marketing to help drive growth, then focusing on profitability and stability through plans and tactical reporting, accountability tools, and the standard tools of budgets, dashboards, KPIs or key performance indicators, and what if modeling. In addition to that, we also then help our clients prepare for the next generation, because our mission is to see that the business continues on. And we do that both in terms of establishing what the value of the business might be, whether it's for exit or to grow by acquisition before exit. We help to figure out the best way to sell or buy a business and work on the strategy to do that. We do a lot of family-owned and next-generation transition work where we're helping owners plan and prepare, counseling family members, developing management teams to take over, and then identifying outside connections if that's needed. And what we really are looking to do is guide successful takeovers so that both the seller and the buyer get what they want out of the deal. Now with that, let's go and take a look at today's agenda. What we're going to do is we're going to start out by looking at current buy-sell conditions and who's playing and for what reasons. Then we're going to look at exit challenges. We'll talk about how to prepare for exit. We're going to then recap to-dos that you need to be thinking about and get into some final considerations. And so if we go and take a look at the current buy-sell conditions, let's start by talking about some of the challenges. One of the biggest ones for business owners is that they're used to running a company and they don't get a lot of practice on how to sell the company, and that can have some huge consequences. What we often find happens is that the owners sacrifice their future for the business. They work harder than they have to. They make less than they can. They are expecting or hoping to fill the gaps when they exit, and they don't pull it off and instead leave a lot on the table at the time of exit. And that's what we want to prevent. So now let's talk about who's playing in the buy-sell marketplace. There are three groups, and I'm going to dig into these three groups a little bit more in a minute, but there are the baby boomers, then there are the Gen Xers, and finally the millennials, who are just, as we say here, getting started. And I'm going to graph it out for you on the next slide and show you what the stats of these three groups look like. So Dahlia, if you can flip to the next slide for me. Next slide is really a supply and demand curve. The sellers are on the top, they are the supply. The buyers are on the bottom curve, they are the demand. And you can see that there is a widening gap between sellers and buyers. And that's primarily because the baby boomers as acquirers have aged out, and most of them are now preparing their businesses for sale or actually putting them up for sale now. And there are very few boomers who remain in the market as potential buyers. At the same time, the middle group, the Gen Xers, have to a large extent bought into a business if they're going to, and they are past their peak buying numbers. That's not to say that there won't be more buying in. Certainly there will be, but not in the quantity that we need in order to close the distance between the supply and demand curve. Finally, at the bottom, we are waiting for the millennials to grow their financial muscle to be effective as a buyer group. So they're really just getting underway. And what this means in effect is there are too many sellers and not enough buyers, which can mean lower opportunity to sell and reduced price offers from smart buyers. what I think is going to happen here is that, unfortunately, for many baby boomers, the millennials, in terms of their interest and, more importantly, their ability to buy, may come too late to help close this gap in a significant way for the boomers. But that's not all that sellers and buyers need to think about when it comes to overall market conditions. It's also been a wild ride in the last few years, with more to come. I don't have to tell any of you that, I'm sure. What we do see right now is that about 70% of small business owners expect a recession, but very few of them feel prepared to weather it. This SMBs, small to medium-sized businesses, have survived an enormous amount: pandemic, supply chain, labor, increasing costs forced by inflation and global unrest. Now the question they're facing is, but are they profitable, and can they get out from under the debt that they've taken on to get to this point? At the same time, we do see large companies shedding jobs in numbers that we haven't seen since the dot-com crash. That does bode well for the SMBs who are looking to hire, which is most of them. But it does, on the selling of the business side, it makes doing an acquisition to obtain a workforce less necessary. So there's less that's compelling a buyer to chase after a potential opportunity to buy. At the same time, in the SMBs, I am really proud of all of you guys as a group. The SMBs have now contributed most of the job growth since COVID, and right as of today, about 4 out of 5 of today's job openings are posted by this SMB marketplace. So you do have the workforce, but you're having difficulty filling additional jobs or swapping people in and out as your needs change. And so you're also facing a question of, do you have the workforce that you need in order to succeed in the future? And so, with a looming recession and uncertainty across all of these questions, baby boomers in particular are asking themselves right now, what do I do next, and how hard do I want to fight to stay in the game, which really comes down to, do I stay or do I go, and is this the time to make that decision? Now, let's take a look at owners' assumptions about who might buy the business and what's the real outcome for them. And on this slide, I want you to start over on the left-hand side of the grid. We see that about 10% of sellers intend to sell to a competitor, and about 10% of business owners expect to sell to outsiders. And if you come over to the right side, those numbers actually play out. It may not be an identical one-for-one match, but about 10% of small businesses are sold to competitors, and about 10% are sold to outsiders. Where the problems come in is in the plans that related to business, family, and employees. So in the lower numbers, the plan for the owners of who might buy their business, 50% expect to pass the business on to a family member, and 30% plan to sell to employees. But if you go over to the right-hand side, only about 15% of businesses actually pass to the second generation. And it gets worse from there. About 5% of those businesses get from second to third generation, and only about 5% of businesses end up getting sold to employees for a variety of reasons. And what that means is a huge gap. There's about 60% of businesses that are unaccounted for using this matrix. 20% at any given time just make the decision to keep on going. They don't have a clear path to exit. They just continue to ride the journey as long as they can. And when they run out of time, then about 40% of the businesses out there end up closing or liquidating, which means that they don't get any value out of the business. So one of the things that you've got to really be careful about here is that you can run out of time, and if you do that, you don't get a deal transacted, and you leave a lot of money on the table. Let's go on to the next slide and talk about what some of the exit challenges are. And I really want to emphasize that all of these challenges are fixable, but it takes work to do it. So in terms of the business, it's a shift from moving the business from to selling and moving on. There's a lot of things you have to think about. And I'm going to, at this point, ask Dahlia to launch our next poll question. And I'd like you guys to weigh in on what you see as the major issues that are impacting your business as you think about exiting the business. And check as many of these as you want. And while you do that, I again want to come back to this shift from running the business to selling the business, which includes taking into account questions like, what are you going to do next? So you've spent a large chunk of your life coming to work, and that eats up a huge portion of your day, your brain power, your energy, and now that will go away. And you have to have something that you're looking towards to do next to make this successful. You also need to be asking the question, what's the business worth? I see business owners all the time trying to do that calculation in their head. And a stat that we used in our valuation webinar is that business owners tend to overvalue or overestimate the value of their business by about 50%. So getting a good understanding of what the business is worth on an accurate way is something very important. You also have to think about, okay, who might want it next? So not who do I want to sell it to, but who might want it next? And then what tools do I have that will help whoever wants it next to take it over and run it successfully? And then lastly, what do I need to learn to succeed at this game, which is some of what we're going to be talking about for the rest of today. So now let's talk a little bit about issues that business owners can be working on right now. I just a couple slides ago talked about 40% of business owners not monetizing their sweat equity by not selling the business. So let's turn that discussion to what every business owner needs to be thinking about, which is personal wealth. And you've got to calculate the facts. Get what you want by building and working on a plan so that when you get to the exit, you actually have what you need. And in terms of doing that, you need a financial planner who can help you calculate retirement. How much do you need? You need to find out what your other assets are worth. So many business owners own a home, they own the business may have a building that the owner owns. They have retirement funds, perhaps 401ks. There's cash at home, there's cash in the business. You have to figure out what all these assets are worth and then what they also might be worth at the time of exit. You also have to define your timeline now to exit because it makes a big difference if you're talking about 1 year, 3 years, 5 years, or 10 years. So when are you hoping to get out? And what will the other assets be worth at exit then is based on that timeline. You have to look very, very carefully at what gaps exist between what you have now and what you want, and then look at how can the business fill the gap. So the most fluid, flexible, leverageable asset that most business owners have is the business. And you want to understand how much the business is worth and needs to be worth in order to fill any gap. And I would really strongly recommend this last line on the page. Do not expect anyone else to solve your retirement issues. No one's going to overpay you for your business just because you don't have enough money to retire on. So get what you want by building and then working on a plan to get exactly that in place. Now, let's go to the next slide. Here's a list of prevalent issues which plague so many small businesses through their plan, through their lifespan. And I will tell you, you can't fix all this stuff overnight, but without it, the price and viability of the sale really suffer. In other words, these items tend to come home to roost during an exit process, resulting in the owner not getting what they want. So as we think about this list, Dahlia, why don't you bring up the poll question answers? And it looks like this is kind of interesting. So the biggest category was the business is too owner dependent. I will tell you that is one of the most fixable issues. And we're going to talk a little bit about how to do that. Lack of generational, oh, can you bring that back up a second, Dahlia? Lack of an exit plan or generational transfer plan, and lack of reserves. And lack of succession replacement plans for key players also seem to be big ones. Nothing went unchecked. So there is work to be done, and let's talk about how to get that work done. So in terms of actions that can impact the saleability and the value, you have to develop plans. You want a long-term focus. From now till exit, where are we going? What do we need to build? How do we build that? Who's going to be accountable for what? With a day-to-day, week-to-week, month-to-month timeline is something really important to build. I don't expect you to know how to do it, but get someone who can help you and hold your hand to the or hold your seat in the chair to work on that. You can work on it a little bit at a time. You also need to build reserves, a tax and bank plan, and success metrics. So what does that mean? Why a tax and a bank plan? When you sell the business, if you owe loans on the business, you have to clear those loans from the profit that you receive for the business, and that profit will be reduced by any amount of taxes that you have to pay. So if you are going to get $1 million for the business and your tax basis is 30%, you're actually going to only get 700,000. And then on top of that, if you owe 300,000 in loans, you're actually only going to net 400,000 out of that $1 million. So you can see how it reduces quickly. On the other hand, if you have reserves in the business, those generally, other than supplying cash flow for typically like a 30 to 90 day period, the cash in the business comes to you either in the value that the buyer is paying for the business, or it actually is handed over to you. And having success metrics helps you understand if you're on track to accomplish the things that you want to accomplish. We'll talk about that more in a little bit. You do want to create structure, procedures, processes. So these are org charts, who reports to whom, who's responsible for what are their job duties, how do they do the work they do? That's in the procedures and the processes. You do want to set up a succession and replacement plan for key players. So how do you grow key players? This is a very deliberate process of identifying talent, helping that talent to develop, getting them education, moving them up in the organization, and then also having replacement plans. So as they move up, or if they should move out, that you do have a way to replace them, which means that everybody in the company should have at least 1 or 2 backups. You do want to define any exit strategy or generational transfer program, and that starts very simply. Who do I expect to sell it to? And then the research that goes into finding those buyers and what you have to do to make the business ready for them. In terms of making the business owner independent, which is your #1 issue, the best way to do this is actually to take vacations. So put people in charge of things and then take off for a week and see what happens and how well they handle it. And if they handle it well, whatever they didn't handle well, fix it, correct it, teach them what they needed to know, and then take off for 2 weeks, and then take off for 3 weeks, and then 4, and then 6. One of the things you have to keep in mind, and I'll talk about this again later on, is that the buyer of the business does not care about you and does not want you. So make sure that you are proving that the business can be owner independent by just not being there and letting the business operate. And whatever you do, make sure that you demand excellence from yourself, from your employees, from your customers, from the business as a whole. Do not settle for less. And you do that by continuing to learn, assembling a team you can rely on who can help you. Now, before we go on to the next slide, if you would just throw up a quick poll question here, Dahlia, on how much time you guys have before exit. And if you just pick the right answer for you. And yeah, I just saw that Robin threw a note up here. If you do have questions, please throw them into the chat window. We will do Q&A at the end of the webinar. And if there's something specific that you're looking for, please throw that into the chat window as well. We'll be happy to get you information after the webinar is over. And we're looking to have a good Q&A session. So give us your questions. We're looking forward to it. Now let's go on to the next slide and let's see about preparing for exit. And you want to bring up the poll questions and we'll just get a little relevance here. So you're all actually scattered all across the platform from most of you think you have about 4 to 5 years, and then scattered evenly across 1, 2 to 3, and 5 years. Okay, great. If you have 1 year, I would really say that you need to get moving fast. It's very risky. You are going to have to cobble together as best you can in any way you can, and this needs to be your primary job for the next year. If you have 3 years, generally, I would say it's doable to get the business ready for a very profitable sale, but you do have to get moving. So again, it has to go up on the priority list of your job to get the business ready for sale and then get other people who are helping you do that. If you've got 5 or more years, most advisors will say that's ideal. And in terms of working on getting ready, whatever you do, write out a plan. This is how we're going to sell the business, who we're going to sell it to, and what we have to do to get it ready for them. And then make sure that you stick to that plan every week. You're working on it and you're checking off what's done and redating what needs to get done. Make sure that you get facts about what the business is worth now so you can put that into your game plan and delegate tasks and add experts to the team. Do not try and do this alone. The business owners who try and get the businesses ready for the sale on their own tend to have the poorest outcomes. Now, let's talk about things that you can do to prepare for exit. The first one I touched on a little bit earlier, get your financial house in order. So I would start with an assessment. I would go through each one of these questions and plan out, okay, where am I and what do I have to do about it? So the first question you want to ask is, how are any debts in the business going to be paid off? You want to do that as much as possible while you still own the business so that the business's profits can take care of that problem. You want to talk about what about tax planning? So get a tax planner onto your team. This is usually a tax attorney. And then depending on who you're using for accountant, they may be able to contribute as well. You want to ask your question, can we live on what we're going to get out of the business? If we can, great. If we cannot, then how much more are we going to need? And that then leads to the next question of how profitable is or could the company be if we focused on driving that? Am I ready to invest time and effort to make changes is a critical question. A lot of business owners are pretty worn out from COVID and just keeping the company alive to this point. And this question of energy is really crucial to what you're going to have to face next, because you're going to have to change what you're doing. And if you don't have enough energy to do it, know that answer now. And then who can help me create a working plan and assemble whoever it is that is going to help you to do that. If you're not sure, definitely come and talk to us. We can talk to you about how to create the plans and how to get help so that that works. And then ultimately, once you've gone through these questions, then consider the pros and cons of, do I delay and stay in the business, or do I go now? Is it really time to just get on with it? In terms of preparing for exit, the next slide, I always call it, let the baby grow up. So you have this baby business that you've built, and it's a teenager, it's a young adult, and it's ready to go out in the world and stand on its own. And this is what we call building a sustainable company. So you want to lay out a profitable growth model. And it's profitable and growth are the two key words here. You want to assemble one team with a common set of goals, open communication, and shared wins. We cannot have people fighting with each other at this stage of the game. You want to invest in training so that everybody in the company and the company overall gets better every year. Spend the money in training. It will pay dividends in terms of growth and profitability. You want to teach your people to be self-sufficient and accountable. So a lot of the times when I'm working with business owners, I will tell them, put a sign on your forehead that says, I'm not an information bureau. Come to me, tell me what problem you're dealing with, then tell me your ideas for how you're going to fix it. I'm going to ask you some questions if I think you're missing something. What about this or what about that? But as an owner, I want to teach you to think, you, the employee, to think, to be self-sufficient and accountable. Um, Develop key performance indicators and accurate reporting so you can see what's working and what's not. And as I said earlier, take vacations, get out of the way. The next buyer does not care about you. You'll also want to get ready to tell the story about your company. It's clear for most business owners, they work really hard at running this business, building a business they're proud of. Now, this is what I call the polishing time. You want to be ready to promote what's best about the business, but you also want to be honest about the rest, because any buyer is going to figure it out anyway. And so we talk about getting strong on 6 platforms: sales, finance, marketing, operations, human resources, and leadership. And that means building expertise in each discipline, having plans in each area for up and down markets. And what do? Developing bulletproof numbers that are talking about how each of those areas of the business are performing, building an outstanding client portfolio, which again goes across the whole platform. Sales goes and gets them, finance rates them, marketing helps fill up the sales bucket, operations takes care of them and hangs on to them, and human resources develops the training and the recruiting to get more people to take on the work that you're doing. And finally, key person handcuffs can be a really effective tool. So the top people who are in your company that you need to have in place to successfully sell this business to the next buyer, think about how you're going to tie them to the business. Do you give them shares in the business so they'll profit when you sell? Do you give them a bonus for staying on board? There are a lot of ways to do it, and there are advisors who will help you with that. The last thing on this slide that I will suggest is build 2 5-year growth plans, one that you're in the process of completing. So you may even go backwards and create it retrospectively, but you want to be able to say, 5 years ago, we were planning to do this and now we're here. And then you want to prepare for the next 5 years. Here's what we're going to do next. And if you're ready to exit now, that becomes the roadmap that the new buyer can look at and say, oh, now I get it. That's where they're going. If you have another 5 years to work on before you exit, that's great. And then start preparing the 5-year plan after that you are going to promote to the next buyer. And if you are thinking about selling to insiders, you really have to be asking the next generation questions about, are they ready to run the company? And here's a really valuable set of questions to be asking them. I would sit down and have very frank and open conversations, whether these are employees or family members. This is a job that you have to understand where they are now, how well prepared they are, and how likely they are to be prepared. In our business at Strategy Leaders, we do a lot of generation transfer, both employees and family members. And I would tell you that there are all kinds of scenarios to pull it off. One of the biggest questions or concerns that I get from business owners is, how will they afford to do it? It's really not hard to figure out how they're going to buy the business. It's one of the most solvable questions of all. The question is, are they ready to take it on and pull it off? Let's go take a look at the next slide. And then I recommend that, having talked with anybody who might want the business, then you also need to look in the mirror and take a really hard, honest look about what your relationship is to the business and the employees who have gotten you this far, and how that is going to impact or color the decisions you're going to make about letting the business go. I know that a lot of business owners get down to the end and they say, look, I really care about my employees, but when it comes down to me or my employees, I have to protect my bottom line first, and they don't actually see a way to protect both themselves and the employees. I think that's a shame when that happens. It's avoidable, but I get it. And so again, my question here, or my advice to you, would be that you do spend time thinking about how important it is to make sure that both your legacy and your employees have a future, and that you think your way through how you're going to feel about that. If you are going to have people either stay in the business or continue on with the business or even buy it, then you have to look at questions about how well tested they are, and how much the sweat equity is that worth to you. And is it really worth as much as you think it is? Because a buyer is not going to pay you for your sweat equity. They're going to pay you based on what they believe the business is worth. And then lastly, what is my most profitable and tax effective sale? I would say that if you think about the most tax effective sale, it is usually an ESOP, an employee stock ownership program, where the business owner can actually do the transaction without having to pay taxes. It takes a lot of preparation and advice, but it is definitely worth considering when you think about tax rates of 30%. And if you don't know what to do there, please come and talk to us. Now, in terms of to-dos, let's start to wrap up here by talking about who else needs to be on your team. Because you are going to need a team to do this exit well and successfully. You need, as I said at the beginning of this webinar, you need a financial planner. If you don't have one, I'd put them on the team right now. Then you need an asset and equity valuation of the business. If you don't know where to go to get that, please come talk to us. We've got a great model for doing that very cost effectively and very quickly. We did a webinar recently on valuations. If you're looking for more information on that, just put a request into the chat window to get a copy of the webinar on valuations. Be happy to share it with you. I think this is one of the things that I see business owners struggling with the most, that they don't get valuations done early or often enough. You want to get someone or more than one person who's going to provide buyer and seller guidance. And here you have to be careful because, for example, the attorneys are constrained. They can talk to their client and they can talk to the attorney for the other party, but they can't talk directly to the other party. As opposed to, so for example, as advisors, we can talk to both sides of the party, and that can help with getting a better picture of what everybody's trying to accomplish. It's not really the price of the business, it's how you accomplish everybody's goals when it comes to selling. Make sure that you do have negotiation leadership on your team, and do not expect that that will be yourself as the owner. The owner should never be on the front line negotiating the deal, but rather sitting back, watching how the deal is getting negotiated and acting as a control and an advisor on that. I want to see this, I want to see that, please go get it done. You are going to need attorney and accountant for data gathering, pricing, contract, tax, and estate planning advice. So you need to work with those people or those team members early on, get to know them, make sure you can work with them. Now, in terms of getting ready, one of the other things I will suggest to you, if you have enough time, if time allows, get some practice at what it's like to go through buying and selling by doing an acquisition. So buy a small business, bolt it onto your business. It will most likely improve the size, scale, scope, and profitability of your business. And it will give you a lot of insight into what happens during these transactions. Make sure that you do define your personal retirement goals and needs, as I said before. Make sure that you are valuing your assets regularly, so don't just do a snapshot and then leave it sit for 5 years. Recruit and test your team of advisors. Get them to work together, give them a project to work on, see how they handle it. Do an assessment of your company in terms of strengths, weaknesses, and gaps so you can work on it, and you can also accurately represent it. Make sure that you do research on buyer options and the marketplace in general, who's out there, who might want to buy the business, what are they paying for businesses. Put together a company overview. So this is a 1-pager or 2-pager snapshot of the business. It can be done confidentially without displaying who your company is. You can have somebody, a third party. We do that often for our clients. We'll send it out as over the transom to people to see what kind of reaction we get. And it's the first introduction to your company. And then work on defining who your ideal buyer is and start doing intros to those people. Have them get to know your business, you get to know them. Now, some more to-dos for you to get the company ready for exit is make sure that you define the roles internally, both your operation and your acquisition team members. So some people are going to have to work on the transition of the business. Some people are going to have to keep doing the day-to-day. Make sure that everybody has enough time to be able to do either one or both. Make sure that you do mature the company, make your numbers bulletproof. I see a lot of times that an offer is made for the business in a letter of intent, then the buyer gets into due diligence and eats away and eats away and eats away at the numbers. And finally, when they get to contract for sale, what was initially offered is not what is being offered in the contract of sale. The amount has been reduced. On the other hand, we've been really successful with a number of our clients of making those numbers so bulletproof that what's offered in the LOI, that's what gets paid for the business. Do know what you want out of the deal, the percentage of shares that you're going to sell. Do keep in mind, you don't have to do 100% outright sale right off the top. You can do a portion. How much money you want to get up front, how much you're willing to take at risk, if any, and what kind of time frame you're talking about. I would suggest that you look at contract examples. Ask your attorney to give you a couple of examples of contracts so that you can see and know what to expect that you're going to be having to deal with. And then do define how much risk you're willing to trade for a payout. Usually the more risk over a period of time, the higher the payout is likely to be, and set some minimums. I won't go any lower than this. Once it does get time to get into a transaction, here are some final considerations. It all comes under the category that I call do the deal right. So get to know your buyers, get clear about what you will or won't accept as negotiation behaviors. And if you see either the buyer or if you're the buyer, the seller, behaving in a way that you won't accept, walk away from the table. There's always another deal to be had. Don't fall down the path of, if I just stick with this, maybe it'll get better. You can ask for a walkaway or good faith fee. Some buyers will pay it, some won't. You are certainly going to expend time, energy, and risk in terms of exposing data on your company in case the seller does pull out. At least you can partially get made whole. Make sure you sign non-compete, non-disclosure agreements up front before you start explaining anything about your business. Define the rules of engagement in the letter of intent. So this is the process we're going to go through to get from here to a contract. This is generally what's being offered and under what conditions. Be prepared to do due diligence and negotiation once you have the letter of intent signed. This is a process. It is not an event. A lot of people come to me and say, well, I want to get this done in the next 2 months. It is not likely. Yes, this takes months to get from initial conversation to exit and contract signed. So be prepared for that. You are going to have to negotiate a sale contract, and you're going to have to figure out what you're going to do next. So right where I started is where we end up. What are you going to do next? What does your life look like when you no longer have to come to work every day? And lastly, some things to think about as you get ready to sell is, how good is your buyer? Can this buyer actually, or potential buyer, come up with the money that they're going to need to come up with? So do some due diligence on them. Have they done deals before? Do they know what to expect? How good are their advisors? How reliable and profitable is your company is a good question to be asking, which is a lot of what we've been talking about here today. How well do you and your team negotiate? Assess that right now. And if you don't think you're very good at it, then supplement the team. And how much are you going to keep from the sale proceeds is something you have to keep your eye on all the time. And with that, as we said earlier, if you are looking for some help, we would love to talk to you. Certainly, you can ask us for a copy of the exit planning timeline. We'd be happy to send that over to you. We'd love to have a chat with you. It is for us all about making sure that these businesses that you have put your heart and soul into continue to have a future as you continue on to do something else with your life. And we're going to start answering questions. So if you haven't put anything into the chat window, go ahead and do that now. And here, as we wrap up, here's a reminder of things that we work on. We do business growth plans. We work with next generation plans. We do advise on either the buyer or the seller side. We do valuations and help with KPI assessments. We develop management teams, and we help families and employees prepare and negotiate for a sale. For us, it's all about the right client at the right time for the right reason. And we know that there are some in the audience who have talked to us about buy sell. We love it. Our mission is to see this continue on, and please come and talk to us. We'd love to help you. And with that, Dahlia, I'm going to stop talking and ask you to go ahead and start shooting questions at me.
Okay, great. So our first question is from Francisco. He asks, does strategy leaders act as a broker?
So no, we are not a broker, but we will help you put together the approach to find buyers. We think that a broker, you got to be careful. If you look at the stats on brokers, they'll even post it on their website. Something like 90% of the listings never go to deals. And I think it's more about knowing who you want to sell to, figuring that out, getting a list, approaching those companies, and then starting to work on the transaction.
Okay, great. Question from William, would like to get a copy of the asset and equity webinar. Okay, perfect. We will send that to you. Thank you, William. Okay, we have another question here. What range of companies in terms of revenue and staff do you deal with as either sellers or buyers?
Good question. So on the seller side, most of the companies that we work with have somewhere between $1 million and 20 to 30 million in revenue. I would say the sweet spot is in the 3 to 7 million, just because that's where more numbers are. If you think about it in terms of employee size, it's typically a handful of employees on up to a couple hundred is really where our expertise shines. And again, the sweet spot would be in the 10 to 50 employees range would probably be the most frequent that we do. And in terms of the, I'm sorry, there was a second part to that question, Dahlia, wasn't there?
Yes, it's what ranges of companies, revenue and staff wise, do we deal with as either sellers or buyers?
Okay, so then as a buyer, we actually encourage our clients to look at deals that are much smaller than that. So in the few $100,000 revenue, few employees range, there are a lot of those businesses that are up for sale, and they are very often the ones that are the least expensive to buy and can have the greatest value when you bolt them onto your company, because you're picking up valuable assets in terms of either products or services, employees, or customers, and you don't have to really increase a lot of overhead to continue to operate them. So they can be bought very reasonably, and the seller often does not have a whole lot of options.
Awesome. Thank you, Andi. A question from William. How do you evaluate long-term clients without formal contracts?
So yeah, that's a good one. without formal contracts, you will take a hit on your valuation. The valuation is primarily based on 3 years of tax returns, the cash flow of the business, and again, I don't mean to simplify it because it is a pretty complex calculation, but it is based on the size of the business. It is based on the return rate of the customers. And if you do have time to work on this, I would encourage you to get contracts in place. We just had one of our clients actually did a really nice job. They just sent out a very pretty cover letter on a contract and said, we're going into this year, our insurance company has asked us to get a contract in place with all of our clients. We would ask that you would please be kind enough to sell this, sign the attached and send it back to us. And they included an envelope. And what they're doing is just taking that shot at getting as many contracts done as quickly as possible.
Okay, and Francisco has a follow-up question to his first question. If you don't act as a broker, where and how do you suggest a business owner to advertise or promote the sale of a business?
So I think it's a matter, first of all, of figuring out who it is that you want to sell to. And then I'm a huge advocate of the direct approach. And if you don't want to disclose that your business is for sale, then get us, get somebody else to actually send out inquiries on your behalf. And you can pull lists of companies that look like they match your criteria, start making inquiries through letters and phone calls to say that we know that there's a business for sale. We think that this is something you would be interested in. We don't know if you're in the market or not. If you are, we'd like to have a conversation, is kind of how you go about approaching that.
Okay, great. Our next question is, what role do you play in buy-sell situations?
So lots of different roles depending on the situation. Sometimes it's the family shrink, and sometimes it is the owner's handholder. A lot of times it is going back and forth. What are you trying to accomplish with both sides of the table, and how can we make that work so that it works for everybody? The idea is to build a win-win negotiation where everybody, I would say the one description of buy sell that I've heard that makes the most sense to me is that the buyer spends a little more than expected and the seller gets a little less than they wanted, but everybody comes away saying in all things it was a pretty decent deal.
Okay, great. Someone asks, how much value does a great credit record bring to the table?
It depends on how you pulled off the great credit record, but it's usually worth something. And what I would recommend is that you have money in the business, keep cash on hand in the business to support the business. And that if you don't want to keep it in the business because you have liability concerns, so you don't want to get sued and lose that money, then at least point a straight line from the business to personal funds to say, hey, the money's available if it has to go back, but it's sitting over here. And what you want to do is prove that the company is profitable. So companies are bought based on profits. And when I make an offer to buy a business, I'm making an offer because I know the business is producing X dollars of profits today. I'm willing to commit 1, 2, 3 years of using those profits up to buy the business. And then I'm also making a calculation on my side as a buyer that I can leverage the business up and make it more profitable. So I will actually be able to pay off those loans faster or have money left over each year because I'm more profitable than what it would take to buy the business.
Okay, great. We have another question from William.
Can you hold on 1 second there, Dahlia? The other thing I would say is that a great credit rating usually is evidence that you've run the business well. and that the business is profitable, because it's hard to have a great credit rating if the business is consistently not profitable. So what I would do is dig into what is it that got that great credit rating. Those are the things that you want to promote.
Awesome. Such a good answer. So William is asking, how does yearly profit to owners affect value, as well as equipment purchased and used in work? And he mentioned section 179.
Oh, okay. So there is a difference between section 179 equipment that's purchased and then depreciated. We use accelerated depreciation a lot of times. So the equipment is depreciated faster than its lifetime. Mostly equipment exists for the purpose of doing business. So the value of the equipment is in its ability to contribute to producing profit. And I think most business owners get hung up, especially the ones that have a lot of equipment in their business. They get hung up on, I've got $1 million worth of equipment and I need to get paid on that. And you probably are not going to. You do have to then do some negotiation. So are you going to sell the equipment as part of the business? Is it going to be included in the valuation? Is it going to be included in the sale? You can look at it both ways, take it out, leave it in. And then you also have to look at, if you're the seller, look at what the buyer wants. We just did a transaction this month where the buyer really didn't want any of the equipment, was going to do the seller a favor and take some of the equipment. They could use it, but it was going to actually lower the profitability of the deal for them. And so they were going to hold back on the deal. And there was about another 20% that they would have been willing to offer in terms of the value of the deal if the seller just kept the equipment and then dealt with selling it on the side after the deal was over.
Okay, great. And I believe this is our last question, but someone is asking if you could clarify a little bit what you meant by do acquisitions if time allows.
Okay, yeah. So, if you've got more than 3 years, I would absolutely pursue this strategy. And at least 2 years. You've got to have at least a couple of years to make some money off the deal, and it takes a year to get a deal done. So if I were a business owner, I would be looking at, let me get an acquisition under my belt. Let me go buy somebody. There's money to be had to do acquisitions. The SBA is open for business, wants to do deals, wants to keep these companies that are up for sale going, keep the employees employed. As long as you've got a good credit rating, you should have no trouble getting the money to do the deal. Again, as long as the valuation on the deal proves out against what you're offering. So I would look at your company and think about, what could I buy that would strengthen my business? Either get us into a new market, get us a new customer portfolio, get us some employees that we need, and get us some employee expertise that we need. Let's go on go shopping and see what we can find. Identify 4, 5, 6 companies that might be targets to buy. Start digging into and negotiating with them, and see whether or not you can actually put a deal together. Put the deal together, digest the deal, get through the acquisition, increase the value of your business, have a more valuable business to sell, and have the experience that, hey, I've been on the other side of the table. I know what this buyer's going through.
That's wonderful. Thank you, Andi, for your answers and insight. And thank you, audience members, for your questions. They were great.
And thank you, everybody, for coming today. This is the stuff we love to talk about. Please, please, please let us know who you are. We'd love to chat with you some more.